how did you become a non-feminist woman?
Honestly, it started when I was in my undergrad, because obviously I just trying to think of the best way to phrase it here. I started my undergrad in psychology.
Mhm.
And so, I started off my first few courses. They were talking about general theory of psychology, things like that. But then I started to get into classes that focused on, you know, feminist psychology and things like that. And as I was reading about the tenets that were involved in feminist psychology, I was like, this sounds like nonsense. It absolutely does not reflect my experiences at all. Um, Lots of talk about, men being oppressors and women having shared experiences of victimization and such. And it was just like, oh boy, I don't like that.
Yeah.
So that was when it started. Kind of in the same time frame was actually when I started to notice men's issues more often, and so I actually got involved in the men's rights community on Reddit, and through that, I actually came to get to know several other people involved in men's rights. I was actually on Honey Badger Radio for quite some time,
Okay.
so yeah, I've had lots of different involvement in in the
Okay.
the subjects.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you are much bigger in anti-feminism than I am. I am probably the worst anti-feminist person in that I don't consume anti-feminist material much, so I don't know who anyone is. It's terrible. I actually should, but I don't know. I just don't. I probably consume more feminist material than anti-feminist, which is strange. But yeah, Um,
I get it. You kind of have to keep on top of
no, I
what is
don't
being
know.
said, right?
I don't know. I need to change my algorithms or something. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, okay, yeah. So, do you believe that we live in a patriarchy in the West?
No, no, I absolutely don't.
Okay.
Um, I think that the whole underlying theme of patriarchy is revolves around male power,
Mhm.
and I don't know if anybody else has been paying attention, but I feel like the
Men don't
focus
have.
has been on anything but men's power lately. And in fact, it seemed much more about tearing down men, as
Yeah,
far as I'm concerned. We have examples of cultures in the world that much more closely resemble the patriarchy that many feminists talk about, and it's nothing like Western communities. And so half the time, whenever people say we live in a patriarchy, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, people often point to like Middle Eastern cultures and so on as patriarchy. And I
Yeah.
suppose they are in the term how yeah, but I think even within those societies, I don't think that men are oppressing women. Yes, they have social structures that give men certain power, and they also it also gives women a certain amount of power. Although no one likes to admit that, but women also have some power within those countries. But
Yeah,
I
I think it's oh,
yeah.
sorry.
So yeah,
I
no.
was
But
gonna say
what were you gonna say?
I think it is more complicated
Yeah,
than what a lot of people
yeah. Because for
are led to
example,
believe.
women in those countries they are not held liable for a lot of things that they do. For example, okay, but they also don't have the freedom to do everything. I see that, but I mean, I've lived in the Middle East a little bit, and not I haven't I've lived as an expat in the Middle East, so to speak. So I can't say that I've interacted on the ground level with but of course I know local people and so on. And I've heard a lot of stories and seen a lot of situations where women were quite abusive, and I mean really abusive. I've met tons of abusive Arab women who have done so things to their husband. I've also met people who are expats, for example, in that setting, and because of the legal framework between men and women, where the wives have totally, like the husbands end up in jail for years and stuff because of things that the wife has done knowingly. So
Yeah.
what I want to say is that it's not just this simple thing of men have all the power and women don't have power. Definitely, women within those societies have power. It may not be the same. They don't have the same power, but they have power. They don't have the same exact powers, but it's not a situation where men are towering over women. I know that everyone likes to paint it like that, and we like to think it's like that, but I really don't think it's like that. But yeah.
Yeah, my husband actually lived for 2 years over in Saudi Arabia as
Mhm.
well, actually, so he's got some experiences
And what would he
in those
say?
cultures as well.
What would he say?
Well, one of the things that I found very striking actually was, how the women talked about their experiences, right? Like it's like, oh well, gosh, we wouldn't want to live in Western cultures where women have to work
Yeah,
and have to do all these other things. No, thank you.
yeah,
And it's hardly an oppressed situation.
right. Because
Many of
what you have to
the men
remember.
talk about their.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah,
I
sorry,
was going to say many of the men talk about. Oh, lag. I get it.
I cut off people all the time. It's terrible. So here we go. Yes, yeah,
uh, so many of the men talk about their women like they're protecting like precious jewels and things like that, right? And it's just a different cultural situation.
right.
It's not as simple as men oppressing women
No,
having all the power that these narratives often talk about, right?
yeah, and the societies are a little bit more divided along class lines, so that's also a big thing that people don't consider. So
Yeah,
with a lot of classism and thing, yeah, the women definitely don't see themselves as oppressed. It not by men. They by class. There's class oppression, of course, and in that
yeah,
sense, yes, they would feel oppressed.
definitely.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so no patriarchy here in the West. Okay, what what are your thoughts on traditional gender roles?
Well, I think I think that there are certain things that people just naturally tend towards. Everybody likes to say that, oh, gender roles are social constructions or whatever they like to say about it, but there are things that there are biological underpinnings towards, right? It's I think it is a natural thing that on the aggregate more women tend to want to be in that more motherly role, um, versus men wanting to necessarily be in the stay-at-home parent role, right? It's just a common you know aggregate thing,
Mhm.
right? And you can say that there are certain like social things that influence that, but I do think there are certain natural biological things that influence that, right?
Mhm.
Like, say for example, breastfeeding.
Mhm.
An infant generally relies on its mother's milk or formula or whatever for the first 6 months of life.
Mhm.
And
Longer.
so
I mean, I
if oh
much longer. I wouldn't say only 6 months. When you're
okay,
breastfeeding, you breastfeed. Well, I breastfed my
yeah,
kids
it's
on average till 4 years. I know I'm sound like a weirdo, but I did.
oh
And
no,
I
I,
think
I,
I
I'm, I'm,
think
s-
what they
I'm
say
actually
is
still with
right.
my,
I think what they say is
yeah,
standard is 2 years. So I would and yeah, I'm a weirdo for 2024. But if we go back historically, I'm pretty sure that was normal. I'm pretty sure it
yeah,
would have
yeah, well,
been
yeah,
normal.
and
Yeah,
I think even longer in the past,
yeah.
right? And but all that is to say, like there are biological reasons why the infant is generally more closely tied to its mother, and therefore the mother is generally more likely to stay with the infant longer than the fathers are. There are reasons
Mm-hmm,
why these roles exist,
mm-hmm,
and I'm not saying that oh, people should be pushed into these roles. I'm not
No.
saying that we have to be tied to these roles like a shackle, but I am saying that there is, generally reasons why they exist. And I think, you can see in cultures where there are more freedoms, you see that people tend to naturally fall into those gender roles more. They did a study where cultures that have more freedom to choose, they tend to go into the more traditional gender roles, right? That's just what people want.
Like which cultures?
It is what it is.
For example.
It was a European country.
Oh, okay.
Might have been Norway. I'd have to look it up again,
okay.
but either way,
yeah,
it's just the way things go.
Yeah, sometimes, and if not, okay. But if it goes like that, okay, it's So
yeah. I definitely feel like people should be free to choose, just again to be clear. But
because
I think that
so many people complain they think society is mean to them because they don't want to have kids, or they want to be single, or they don't want gender roles. And I'm sorry that society is mean. We shouldn't be mean. But at the same time, some people are going to choose the traditional roles, and that also has to be okay. So
definitely. I think different strokes for different folks, right?
Okay. So, what are your thoughts on MRAs?
Well, I think that it's a very big question, because there are some people that will go hard line and act like women are the enemy, and this, that, and the other thing. And I think, that's pushing it too far. And then, there are many more moderate MRAs, much like people in Honey Badger Radio, for example, that are, they're just trying to push for men to have, the same rights as women, right? And as much as people like to balk at that idea, like there are certain segments where women have guaranteed rights to things that men don't. That's right? True. So,
which rights would you say men need?
Well, for example, a commonly cited one is the right to bodily integrity as infants, right? Male circumcision is something that is still not only allowed but common, whereas that's not the case for female infants. Women, when giving birth to their child, they know that it's their child, right? Whereas with DNA testing not being mandatory, men don't always have that certainty, right? There's all kinds of inequities in custody in courts when men are divorcing. As a counselor that works with men, I see it all the time, where men seriously struggle to get time with their children, despite research showing that children tend to do best when they have equal access to both parents. So, like, those are probably the main ones. There's obviously much more that can be said, but
reproductive rights, and they face longer times in jail. Also just bias in society, probably. Okay.
Yeah, well, and not to say nothing about attitudes towards women's issues versus men's issues, right?
What are your thoughts on intersectionality?
I think that it is a concept that was perhaps nice sounding in theory, but in the end, it wound up leading to a lot of division and assumptions. So like if you're assuming things about somebody based on the categories that they're living in,
that you can see, because you can't see half of the categories that someone
exactly. You wind up having all kinds of biases about people before you even get to know their situation. There was an assignment in one of my master's degree courses where we were meant to research issues that impact a certain demographic, right? And then do an interview with somebody from that demographic. And not sharing details so as to protect that person's identity, basically, all of the research papers that I read on that demographic were all talking about how they experienced, various forms of oppression and things like that. Whereas the person I interviewed said, no, quite frankly, this category that I belong to has actually gotten me all kinds of scholarships and has made it easier for me to find work. And so, if anything, their experience was completely the opposite from what lots of these papers were talking about.
Right. Yeah, because I also think it depends on which category we're talking about, but many categories that are seen by society as underprivileged, of course, people also have a sympathy response. When society is aware that this category has problems, then there would be people in society who would say, I have more sympathy for your situation. Of course, it depends. It depends on the society and so on. So sometimes there's this underprivileged, but it comes with a flip side, sometimes.
Yep, definitely.
Okay. So, what are your thoughts on hypergamy? Do you think that women tend to marry up or look for someone who has more than them, or how do women,
Generally speaking, I think that that's true. I think that it can manifest in different ways. Some women might look for somebody who is wealthier. Some women might prefer, somebody that's taller. Some people might prefer this or that category. But generally speaking, I think there are many women that are looking to get, the best partner that they can, right?
Right.
And I think that it probably comes in different strengths in people as well. I think that, and this might seem a little bit, but I think there are some women that are fine with, just the first man that they get into a relationship with, and they're happy and they're content. But I think there are also some women who, admittedly are trying to forever seek better and better and better, right?
Right.
So I think it's like a spectrum of
Right.
hypergamy, right? There are
Right.
some
I
people
agree.
that
There's a spectrum. There would be women who are not hypergamous at all, of course, because I mean,
yeah.
humans are so diverse. There are people who don't even think of, they're asexual people. There are people who wouldn't think about this
Totally.
at all. But of course, there would be people who are on the flip side when it's a thing. And I tend to think it's a thing because I think that I am someone who has displayed some level of hypergamy personally. So I
Right.
do think it's a thing. But I don't think it exists for all. And I think it's like a very small instinct in a sense. And I think it also depends on your lived experiences a lot more than it does on your biology. Because if you're from a very stable situation where you didn't have money problems, I think you're much less likely to be hypergamous. But or to
Yeah,
care.
I think
Yeah.
that makes sense
Yeah.
because I think it's often driven by
Yeah.
a need to
Exactly.
have your needs met, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah. So I think it's something like that.
yeah.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on gynocentrism?
Oh my goodness, I definitely think that it's something that exists. For an easy recent example, look at the men versus bear scenario that is all the rage these days.
What are your thoughts on this, men versus bear?
Oh my goodness, I've actually made a set of videos on it, to
Okay,
be
okay.
honest.
On which channel? What is the channel? We will
The
link the
channel.
channel below, but what is the name of the channel? So people
So
know.
it's the Prim Reaper is
Okay,
the channel. Yeah.
okay, okay.
But yeah, so it's I think that it's a really good example of how, women can share no matter how irrational their fears may be, people will jump to take them seriously, right?
Yeah.
So I think that you need only to look and see how far this hypothetical scenario has spread in order to see how people take women's concerns seriously, right? And you see very few people being able to challenge this thing and
I know because
not
they put it out there like it's all about sexual assault. At first if you were gonna challenge it, for me too even, I was like, what ridiculous, weird thing is this, you know? But then when
Yeah.
you start to read it, they all like, we've been abused, we've been abused, we've been abused. And if you don't get it, you are privileged, you know? So it's kind of like, well, okay, I can't say anything to that because in a sense, maybe I am privileged, right? Okay, in this sense, maybe. But
Yeah.
but they're like, you know, they've been abused in childhood and stuff like this. And it's like, okay, well, you know, part of it I think is that you know, they have this statistic where they say a lot of women are abused, right? And
Mhm.
I think if those statistics are true, then in feminism, these women, there would be a overrepresentation of abused women. So they are all products of abuse in a sense, and the abuse that they write about in these threads is childhood abuse, meaning people interfered with them as children and stuff. It seems so. This is seriously quite harsh stuff. And what can you say to that? You know,
Right. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I mean, you know, I think that, you know, again, as a counselor, I think that it is important for people to, you know, do the hard work
hmm
of examining their traumas, working through them, you know, dealing with any irrational phobias that might have come up as a result of their abuse so that they don't perpetuate,
yeah.
you
Because I
know,
mean, yes, they've been
stereotypes
abused,
against.
but it's not an
Yeah,
excuse to hurt other people. And
exactly,
basically, they have
right?
to realize that their language is hurtful. And
Yes.
men have tried to say that, but they get
Mhm.
laughed at. Men have tried to
Yeah.
say not all men when they said teach men not to rape, but men
Yes.
just get laughed at over and over. They say when you say not all men, we mean you.
Yeah.
In all of
Yeah.
the threads, they just keep laughing. Y'all men who come in here, we mean you. That's who we don't want to meet in the forest. And
Yes.
you know, so they just coming at the men, and it's like, I understand that you have been assaulted and that you have been hurt, and my sympathy, yes, but at some point, yes, you cannot use this pain to hurt people who have absolutely nothing to do with your assault.
Totally. Yeah. And the fact that, you know, the response to the men challenging this is like universally negative,
Yeah.
and
And the fact
you know
that, you
that.
know, saying, oh, they're for men to, and blah, 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 and men should be able to speak out. It's like men are trying to communicate with you in a very nice and humble way. What they're trying to say is that you are saying hurtful things. They literally try to tell you this, and you just laugh at them, and you think you're listening to men. How is that
Yeah.
listening to anybody? Somebody complains. You know, we talk about pronouns and thing. I made a video saying that they say, you know, with pronouns we have to use the right pronouns. I agree with them. Use the right pronouns, right? But this is being sensitive to someone because you use the right pronouns because the person said, "I'm hurt when you call me him or whatever, her or whatever. If you say the wrong thing, so you will be
Yeah.
careful." Men are hurt when you call them rapist. Be
Mhm.
careful. It's how hard is that?
Right.
You know,
I
like
know.
I'm
I
hurt if
know.
you misgender me. Hey, I'm hurt
Yeah.
if you call me a rapist. Is it
Big
very hard?
surprise, right?
Is it, you know?
But you know, to tie this all back into the original question of gynocentrism, you know, this is just an indication. Women can say things like this, and you know, everybody jumps to take them seriously, right?
Yeah.
Nobody challenges what they're saying, so they can complain, they can vent about any little thing that bothers them, and everybody jumps to take them seriously.
Yeah.
The world is focused very heavily on women's
And but
comfort.
yet they're still complaining because they're saying that men need to fix this rape. You know, the
I
idea
know.
is that men, I have spoken to them so much, seriously, and I've seen all their memes. I'm, like I said, I'm more in feminist circles than anti-feminist circles. Their idea on this whole thing is that men need to fix this rape situation. I had women comment and talk to me and say, well, it's men's fault. And I'm like, how are men going to fix this rape situation? And they're like, they just need to stop raping. You know? And it's like, what? What?
If only we didn't think of that
Yeah, the
before.
solution is they just need to stop raping. It's like, she's like, only men can fix this. They just need to stop raping. And it's like, really? Really? Your idea on the rape situation in the world is a simple solution that men need to just stop raping. It's like, really?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Just stop. Just don't murder. Just, don't murder.
Yeah.
Just don't steal cars, and then all of a sudden miraculously the theft
Yeah, just
problem
don't
is
be a
done,
bad
right?
person. Yeah,
Yep.
nobody's gonna be
Yep.
bad again. We forgot to tell them that in kindergarten. Should have
I
just told all the kindergartners, don't be bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If only it were that simple.
If only it were that simple, yeah. They're like, I'm suppose when a feminist religion decides to write 10 commandments, 3 of the commandments will be men don't rape.
Exactly.
They'll be like, woman, you can rape all you want. Men don't rape.
I know, right? God. Uh,
Oh gosh. What are your thoughts on being called a pick me girl for your opinions?
well, I mean, first of all, it's like when it's directed at me, it's irrelevant because I've been happily with my partner for 14 years. So it's like I couldn't care less.
Mhm.
That's not what this is about. Um, but in reality, frankly, whenever I see people saying that, it's like, so you're invalidating my opinions, or quite frankly, anybody else who shares similar opinions, um, to say that I'm just trying to get male attention, right? Well, quite frankly, I think that you're being more of a misogynist than any of the men that you're supposedly against are, right? Because the only person in this case invalidating what I'm having to say is you, and you're doing it because of a faulty reason.
Mhm.
So if you can't, you know, challenge my arguments on their own merits, and you have to just kind of dismiss it as, oh, you're just trying to get attention, it's like, well,
Mhm.
I think that has much more of a reflection on anybody that says that
Yeah.
than it does on me, quite frankly.
So, if you had to summarize your views on feminism in general, like what would be the most important or the most concise way that you could just say, what are your views or what's the heart of your views on feminism?
Okay. Well, I think, in general, I actually call myself a non feminist rather than an anti feminist. And I do that for one main reason, because I have known people that do consider themselves feminists that legitimately see the problems that are facing men, and they actually try to fight for those rights where men are suffering. So they actually kind of try to fight for equality. So I don't want to sound like I'm coming down against those people. But I think that most of feminism as it is now is really just about being against men. You can see it in the way that most people that call themselves feminists talk about men. In the examples we've already talked about in this video, like, oh, all men need to just stop raping, or, we live in a patriarchy, or women have shared experiences of oppression. And it's like, no, none of these things are accurately reflect the situation at all. So I think that feminism as a whole is just mostly polarizing, mostly anti-male, and I think that it's far better to take more of an egalitarian stance where we can legitimately say, okay, women maybe have some difficulties in this area, but men also have difficulties in, these areas over here, and all of those should be treated with equal weight, and they should all be respected.
Mhm.
That is probably the best summary of my views.
Okay. So, do you have a YouTube channel?
Yes. So my YouTube channel is the Prim Reaper. I've been running this channel since about 2017. Um, it's just a little cartoon character based on a clay figure that I actually made in high school, but I thought it would make a cute mascot. But on this channel, I talk about issues relating to feminism. I talk about issues relating to men's issues. I talk about mental health topics. I have been doing a very deep dive on the APA guidelines for men and boys, where I systematically go through each guideline and kind of tear apart various parts in them that I think are actually bad for men's mental health.
Mhm.
So yeah, lots of different subjects, but
Okay.
I put out a video once a month,
Okay.
and I really actually quite enjoy it.
Okay. Good. So I will put the link in the description, and yeah, thank you so much for interviewing. Yeah, that's the end
Yeah,
of the
thank you
interview.
for having me on.
Okay.